Welcome everyone. Today we bring another our new guest, Marco Elman, and he's the president of New York Real Estate, and he has a lot of experience in real estate, stock markets, and different kind of business. From him, basically, we will know about the background, about his experience, about the real estates, and many more business idea from him. Hello, Mr. Marco Elman. How are you?
I'm good, Sharif. Good morning. How are you?
Yes, yes, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you. Can you introduce yourself with our audience?
Sure. As you know, my name is Marco Elman. My company is actually called Elman Realty Advisors. We're located in Manhattan, in New York City. We specialize in office leasing, brokerage, and consulting work. I've been doing that for about 35 years now, specializing primarily in helping tenants relocate their offices in New York, which is somewhat of an arduous process because you have many very sophisticated landlords that are out to get as much money as they can out of tenants, and tenants have to learn the market. So what we do is educate tenants as to the marketplace and what the risks are associated with renting office space in New York and what all the expenses are associated with it. It's much different than residential real estate. Residential real estate in the United States is relatively simple. People go out, they look at homes, they put in an offer, they negotiate price, maybe a couple repairs, they go to contract, and they close on the house. In commercial office leasing brokerage, the similarities is that we meet tenants, we take them out, we show them properties, but the process of negotiating and acquiring office space is much more complex because you have to bring into the equation architects, contractors, and lawyers to negotiate many facets of the deal. That's kind of a quick overview of it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So basically, we want to know about the present condition in New York. What do you think about the present situation in New York?
Well, the situation in New York and my profession has come to a grinding halt as of about the middle of March. Uh, Basically, went into lockdown like the rest of the country. The good news is in New York, phase two for New York City, which is one of the last to go to phase two, begins tomorrow, Monday. So I'll actually go back to my office. But not many people are going back to their offices. Many companies have been unable to operate at all because of the COVID-19. They haven't been able to go to the office. Their businesses have been decimated because of global activities associated with their businesses. There's some businesses that have thrived, however. Um, Technology companies where employees can work from home very easily have done quite well and are prospering. Law firms are prospering. Accountants are prospering. But companies like retail, in particular, the restaurant business has been totally decimated. And the biggest problem has been that restaurants and other office tenants, as well as retail tenants, are looking for relief from landlords, but landlords aren't getting any real relief themselves. So what's been happening in New York City and also around the United States, landlords have been sticking to only giving deferments on rent, basically meaning that when they close down, they still owe the rent, and they've been offering the opportunity for the tenants not to pay rent for maybe 2, 3, 4 months. And then or maybe they pay half rent even, some of the deals I've been negotiating. But all that rent that's still owed contractually from the original lease document has to be paid back to the landlord. So the way it's structured is, so say if they pay half rent for 3 or 4 months, the remaining rent that's still past due will begin to be paid starting about a year down the road, incrementally over maybe a year's time. Restaurants, however, have gotten the worst hit of all because they've invested a great deal of money. They've been totally out of business, and landlords have not been very helpful, where in office situations they've been more helpful. It's a big mess. We're going to see how it all ends off probably starting the next couple months. It's still early to tell. But in the early days, tenants would approach me saying, hey, I want to renegotiate my lease. I want to move. And what I told all the tenants that I work with is you have to really just sit tight. It's too early to make any kind of decisions. And what we're anticipating is a decrease in the value of office space in New York, because most tenants that I've been interacting with realize that their employees can effectively work from home. They're going to need maybe half as much space for office occupancy. even taking into account, and that's the big question, social distancing in offices. So maybe, many tech companies have space where they have what they call bench style seating, where people are sitting literally on top of each other. I equated it years ago during the internet boom, when we came out of a deep recession then also. And when the internet companies emerged, all of a sudden it was like we were back having factories in New York. But instead of having people next to each other with sewing machines, they were all next to each other with laptops. Well,
Mhm.
that style of work is not working all of a sudden, and it's not going to be working into the future.
Mhm.
So there's be a drift back into the old style of more private offices, I imagine, and people being spread out. In New York, they're going to be doing A, B, where half the workers would come in one day, the other half of the workers would come in the other day. We'll see how that works. And what they've passed is a ruling that says only 50% of your employees can initially come into work. Now, what that really means is not 50% of your employees. What it really means is 50% of what's permitted as per your certificate of occupancy. And the certificate of occupancy is a document that dictates how many people you're allowed to have on an individual floor. So perhaps you have a certificate of occupancy that permits 100 people and you only have 60 people. That means you can still bring in most of your workforce, that being 50. But if you have 100 people, only half of your workforce can come in. And there are other nuances associated with New York real estate, because a typical 10,000 foot floor in one building may have a totally different certificate of occupancy than a 10,000 square foot floor in another building. So that'll dictate how many people are permitted on one building's 10,000 foot floor, which is different than another. And that ties back into things like egress, how large and how wide the staircases are in a building. And there's a lot of intricacies like that will affect what will happen going forward.
Mhm. Very interesting. Just as you are like long time, you have experience in business, and you are facing this kind of challenging situation right now. Like World Talent Economic Forum, we have perception to making a real bridging in between industry and academia. So we do not want to only do work with academia or only work with industry. We want to make a proper bridging in between your experience from industry and the academic people, how they're making their policy, their discussion, and everything. In that particular situation, like how you want to share your last 30 years or more than that experience with us, like how we can make a proper bridging in between industry and academia. What's your experience? How do you want to share your experience with us?
Well, what I can tell you is about what I do is not something you typically learn in academia. This is something what we call OJT, or on the job learning. I
Mhm.
was always interested in real estate. I just found it intriguing. But you don't really learn how to do what I do unless you actually get a job and go out there and do it. The fact that I studied business is helpful because I have a background in accounting and marketing and advertising, which is very helpful because I ultimately need to market space that I represent. I need to analyze tenants' financial statements so that I can identify whether or not they're a safe tenant to come into a building. And then that'll affect what kind of security deposits a tenant will have to post, how much tenant improvement dollars a landlord might agree to invest into a space. So, from an academic point of view, there's a lot you can learn about real estate in school. Although I learned very little in school about real estate. In fact, I did not take a single course in real estate. Uh, and the courses that are mostly given in New York are geared around residential real estate. Commercial real estate, which I'm involved with, is something where you have to learn by doing, not so much by studying.
Mhm.
I mean, the way you get started in my business is it's all about cold calling, because no one hands me business. It's challenging. It's for someone who's willing to go out there and bang on the doors in some fashion and be a real rainmaker. That's the only way you can be successful in my business. And that's not something you're going to learn in a college class so easily.
Mhm. Mhm. One of the major point, I'm from academia, I find that financial literacy, proper financial knowledge, there is a absent. Let's say mortgage loan. Let's say we are talking about how we utilize my finance, stock market, and this kind of things. So how you want to share is your experience, because you have engagement with the housing industry as well as with these stock markets. how we our people can learn from you. What's your perceptions and experience as well?
Well, I guess simply put, I've been a stock market investor since the early '80s. In fact, before I got into the real estate business, I worked in advertising and marketing, and then I worked in international banking. But I really didn't like sitting around in an office. And repeat your question again specifically.
Specifically, I want to know like how we can engage with different kind of like your portfolio, like you making your portfolio with stock
Oh,
market
okay. The
with
point I was going to
yes,
make was that in
yes,
terms of investing in the stock market, I
yes,
highly
yes.
recommend investing in things that you understand,
Mm-hmm.
because too often people say, "Oh, this sounds like a great idea," but they know nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
And even myself, I've been lucky because I invested, for instance, in Apple Computer many years ago. But I
Mm-hmm.
invested in Apple Computer for a different reason than what made it so successful at the time, about 12 years ago, 13 years ago. When my children were finishing up high school and entering college, every single one of them wanted a Apple Computer. They did not want a PC. And I said, wow, Apple's really going to turn this thing around. Everybody into the future is going to want Macs instead of PCs. That's why I bought it. I bought the stock. As it turned out, I was totally wrong. Well, not totally wrong, but mostly wrong, because the iPhone came out the following year and
Mm-hmm.
revolutionized communications. And they took a huge amount of market share across the world, and that increased the revenues for Apple dramatically. And then they went
Mm-hmm.
on further into the music industry and
Mm-hmm.
created the Apple Store, and they've just
Mm-hmm.
made billions and billions of dollars. And so sometimes you have to be lucky rather than smart in the stock market. But my primary philosophy is you have to look for things that you understand. One of my more recent acquisitions a couple of years ago was a company called Twilio, Twilio, Twilio. And
Mm-hmm.
when I read about that, I was fascinated by it. A gentleman had created a technology that encrypts communication, and it was being used by Uber and Lyft, and then they have hundreds of companies using it, so that you can communicate with one another without people without anybody breaking into it, and no one else you don't even know who you're communicating with, basically. And
Mm-hmm.
Twilio's stock has tripled in value over the last 2 years. And
Mm-hmm.
just understanding what's going on in the world, I recognize that could be, a really, really successful company. More recently, I bought Slack, and Slack, you're familiar with, I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's another communication company that has not done as well yet. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
holding it. I've had it for about a year. I bought it shortly after the IPO. The stock opened up somewhere in the mid to high 30s. It dropped down. I bought into it, and then during this past year, it dropped down and broke below 20. But I held on, and during the pandemic, it's become more popular again, and it's worked its way back up into the 30s. And hopefully, it'll turn out as a good investment.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Very
key to
interesting.
investing really in the
Mm-hmm.
stock market is diversification. You've heard that over and over again. And
Mm-hmm.
and most people are better off using professional advisors. The reason I'm not always using professional advisors is they always like to totally diversify your portfolio, put your money in either an electronically traded fund or a mutual fund. Whereas personally, you're never going to hit a home run doing that. And I like to have big winners every now and then. And the way to do that is carefully selecting a good stock. So maybe I'll select two, three, four stocks that I really like, and all I need is one of those stocks to take off, and it makes up for any money I might lose on the other stocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it fun. I've also developed a pretty thick skin, because you need a very thick skin, because you can lose a lot of money, or you can
Mm-hmm.
lose various amounts of money. And if you can't deal with the pain of watching the value of your portfolio or the value of your individual stocks go down, you don't
Mm-hmm.
belong doing that on your own.
Mhm. Mhm. Like as a successful real estate agent and a real estate consultant, we find your name in different famous books and different famous person. How you deal with different kind of big real estate companies in USA, and how you make your business so successful, and what is the reason behind that? Like, is there any strategic point of view or anything you identify which will help you to make so successful in that particular area?
Well, the key to my business and most businesses is repeat customers and referrals. So it's a matter of being trustworthy and honest with the people you deal with, so that they know that when they call you up, they're going to get a straight answer.
Mhm.
Now, I got into the business and worked for another company for about 10 years, where I really learned the business. You got to remember, I got into the business in the late 80s. There was no internet. They were just
Mhm.
inventing the fax machine at the time, or just utilizing it, became ubiquitous shortly thereafter. And we used to run around town. If we needed a floor plan to deliver to a tenant, to consider for a space, we'd have to actually visit a landlord's office physically, or hire a messenger to go pick it up and bring it to our office, or deliver it to the tenant, or deliver it to an architect. So I did
Mhm.
spend 10 years learning the legal part of the business, as well as just learning the New York City environment, because you really have to know all the buildings in New York, where the office space is. You have to become familiar with the landlords, and not so much the landlords, but the brokers, because the key to our business is interacting with other brokers, because 99% of the transactions have two brokers. One is representing the tenant, and one is representing the landlord. So
Mhm.
the brokers have to know that you're honest also. They have to know that when they're negotiating with you, you're being straight with them. So after about 10 years of working at a company, I started getting offers with the largest companies in the city. But
Mhm.
the internet had not started yet. But what had happened at that point in time is, in the earlier days, each individual real estate company would maintain their own listings of available office space.
Mhm.
And around that time, a couple of years before I started my firm, a couple of companies went out and they said, "Hey, we will supply the listings. We will do all the research and make all the listings available, and you just subscribe to us, so you don't need an in-house real estate listings department." So
Mhm.
about a year or two after that happened, I realized, as I was interviewing with various companies around the city, I didn't have to go to work for a big company to get the listings. I could just spend the money and buy the listings from this service, and I could operate with the same access to the same information the big companies had. And
Mhm.
I didn't like the way the big companies worked in terms of telling me who I could work with, how I had to operate, what my split would be, what my title would be at the company, what hours I had to work. I really
Mhm.
was a very independently minded person. It's
Mhm.
part of the reason why I went into real estate, because it's a business that gives you a great deal of independence in terms of what you're doing. So I
Mhm.
elected to instead just go out on my own. And the first thing I did was I put 10,000 American dollars into a bank. I rented some office space with some people I knew. I
Mhm.
bought a laptop. I went to school and
Mhm.
learned how to do Microsoft Word, and went back to
Mhm.
my office and started typing. And I was up and
Mhm.
running. And I had the listings at my fingertips. And that's how I got started. And that was back in 1994. So I've been
Mhm.
doing this for quite a number of years since then. And then a few years, within a year after having started my business, the internet boom began. And
Mhm.
fortunately, I was given a referral of a magazine I'd never heard of before. Maybe you've heard of it. They evidently were looking for office space in my neighborhood, which is the Flatiron District of New York, which ultimately became Silicon Alley, play off of
Mhm.
Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
And this other tenant friend of mine, this advertising agency, said, "My friends have this magazine. They can't find good space. Can you help them?" I said, "Sure." I met them. I showed them a half a dozen space. They say, "Hey, this is great. We like everything you've shown us." The name of the magazine was Wired Magazine. I don't know if you're familiar with Wired, but Wired
Mhm.
is a very popular magazine in the States, and it was the first magazine that tracked the internet world, essentially. And these folks liked me a lot. I did a good job for them. I rented them 16,000 feet on 19th Street at the time, off Fifth
Mhm.
Avenue. And they started referring friends of theirs to me. And then I
Mhm.
ran with the internet crowd for the next, I guess, 8 years until the bust in 2000, 2001.
Mhm.
And then the smart thing I did at that point, I sort of pivoted and looked where the dollars were going so that I could find business elsewhere. And I realized nonprofits were still thriving. And I started working with nonprofits, which I'd worked with many years before. I spent a lot of time working with AIDS organizations in New York when the AIDS crisis broke out. And so I became familiar with how nonprofit boards worked. When I worked with the AIDS organization, it was a very interesting time also, because landlords were unwilling to accept AIDS related organizations in
Mhm.
their buildings, because they initially thought that if you shook hands with someone who had AIDS, you'd get AIDS. And the beauty of that deal, which I take a lot of pride in, was I showed them the market, but it was as difficult as it was also easy because I would call up every landlord's agent, tell them who I represented, because my business is all about exclusive agency work, where I'm the sole broker working with the tenant. There are no other brokers representing them in looking for space. I'd call a landlord and say, hey, I represent the AIDS Resource Center. This is what they do. And the landlord would say, no, we won't take them. No, we won't take them. And then finally, a number of landlords said, we don't have a problem. And then I had two landlords basically competing to have their tenancy. And it was interesting because one of the spaces was absolutely gorgeous. It was built by a prior tenant. We went in there, we loved it. And then we had another space that was nice, but it wasn't crazy gorgeous like this. And the executive director and I looked at each other and said, we can't take that beautiful space, because their donors would come visiting them and say, you spent all our money on building the space, which wasn't true. So we leased them a really nice piece of space, and they moved on with their business. And very satisfying to do that.
Yes, understand. So, like example, any kind of transformation come to the business, you adjust with that. Like
Yeah.
when it's a traditional method, you successfully run this traditional method. When it internet come, like this kind of things come, you also involve with that. So my I want to know more. Like example, as you are working with the top real estate company in USA, even in now present US president, in his book we find your name, and as you are very prominent consultant for real estate agency. But my question is that in a long time, what I can understand, you have a learning attitudes. Like when you transfer, you go with a different learning approach and you adjust with that, and you implement it in your business. So what your advice for different kind of business persons and the academic people we have in our community, like how they grow their learning approach, even if they are from industry, only in the business industry, how they can implement it?
Well, I have a very simple approach, which is I say you always have to have your eyes in your rear view mirror. You have to see what's coming up behind you to eat your lunch, because in the business world, there's always somebody out there looking to compete with you and take your business away from you. So you have to remain mobile and be able to pivot on short notice. I mean, I remember back in the mid 90s, Goldman Sachs had decided to develop a real estate business, which would have knocked me out of business. And they invested, I think it was about $50 million, not a huge sum for them at the time, in a business where they would offer the services that we did in a database. And it got me very, very nervous, because they were getting, because I don't work on gigantic deals. I work on small and medium sized deals. My company is a relatively small company. I don't compete with the largest companies in New York, because you don't need gigantic deals to make good living doing this. And I like to give a great deal of attention. But their approach was they were going to create a database and let all sorts of office tenants uh, into their database, and let the tenants use their database to find space without using a broker. Well, it failed miserably, because there's a human element that's required to find and negotiate office space. It's not so simple. They're very subjective things that have to be taken into account when you rent office space in New York. In particular, the square footage. Landlords in New York habitually lie about square footage, and they're allowed to. There's nobody stopping them. And I've had a big problem with this. And I've had to teach people many times, don't focus so much on what the landlord calls it. We have to take a careful look at how much space it is, do a layout, make sure the space works for you, and compare it to the next space and figure out what either space is going to work, irrespective of what they call the square footage. Because there's something called a loss factor in New York office space, which is the difference between what the real square footage is, which is the usable, versus what they're marketing it as, which is the rentable square footage. That differential can be anywhere from 25% to 45%. You can almost, look at situations where you're only getting 60 to 65% of 10,000 feet, for instance, and you're going to net out only 6,000 or 6,500 rentable, usable square feet on a 10,000 rentable number, and go into another building where you're getting 7,500 instead of 6,500. That could not be put into a Goldman Sachs database so easily. And then I was pleased to see that disappeared because the human element is essential for people. I don't think robots and AI is going to take over my business so fast.
Oh, okay. This is actually another interesting discussion. Always we believe that, and you come up this point that robots and AI, everybody now discussing that they will engage with the industry, they will engage with the different kind of industry. So you also give some sort of analysis that okay, how you have a practical experience and this business need human interactions. So AI and robot they will not take your job. So, like example, do you have any experience to making any business bridging in between North America and Asia Pacific? Do you have any idea, or you did it before, or any plan or anything?
No, like I said, my business, I most of my business is done in an area between 34th Street and Chambers Street in New York. New York
Mm-hmm.
is a very dense city. I only need a very small fraction of the market
Mm-hmm.
share to make a good living.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't found the necessity to go overseas. Now, I've represented companies from Europe that have come to New York
Mm-hmm.
because they'll seek me out because of my expertise in New York. But I've had no reason to go overseas. I'm very happy here. The funny thing is, when I was a college student, I travel a lot. I love travel. It's my favorite pastime. And I used to think when I was a student, I want to get a job with travel, which I never did. And I'm glad because most people I know that travel with their job never really get to see the places they travel to. They fly there, they go to a meeting, they come home. They don't enjoy the travel.
Mm-hmm.
So as it turns out, what I thought was a good idea, which didn't transpire, ended off was not such a great idea.
Mhm. Another important thing is that, like example, if we do some case study, because as a business scholar, when we find any kind of industry, we do some case study. So we find that you are very successful in the investment and the business relationship and these kind of things. But my question is that when you do portfolio, business portfolio, let's say stock markets, real estate, and other business, what's the priority things you always focus, or how you make this kind of portfolio for your business?
I don't fully understand your question.
Like example business portfolio, let's say you are not only focusing on one business, maybe you are distributing in, let's say, two three business, you distributing your finance or distributing your professional times and everything. So when you distributing your time and everything, let's say two specific thing, one is stock market, another one is real estate. So how you make combine of these kind of things?
I wouldn't say that I combine them.
Okay, okay,
Uh,
okay, okay, okay.
okay, what I can tell you is my day-to-day business is such that I try not to work on too many transactions at one time, so I can really focus the most attention on individual customers. So
Mhm.
that because you don't, if you're working on too many deals at one time, you can't really service your customer as well as you should be. So I'll turn away business if it's offered to me that I don't want. I'll evaluate if it's business worth working on, and if it is, I'll work on it. Now, there's some very small transactions I'll work on for more personal reasons or because it's a referral and I'll help people out that are friends of other people I have. But I'm very careful about what I work on. Right now we're about to go into a very, very different time again, which I've seen before, because we're going to see a tremendous amount of sublease space hit the market in New York. All the tenants I'm working with are looking to downsize, or I shouldn't say all, most of them are. They're looking to downsize. So they're asking me to either sublet their space outright so they can relocate into smaller space, or they're looking to find a subtenant to share the space with them, which gets kind of tricky. It's hard for two people to share space with one another because of various corporate cultures. So as these deals start coming to my attention where people are going to say, please sublet my space, unfortunately, I'm going to have to look at their spaces and evaluate how marketable their space is. Because if their space is not marketable in the current environment, I don't want to take on that project wasting my time. I'd rather advise them that they're going to have a very, very difficult time renting that space because of market conditions. And let's come up with another strategy to figure out how they can move forward.
Mhm. Mhm.
As
Very
far as the
interesting.
stock market ties into that, I mean, I work with a lot of technology companies. So I watched a lot of these companies go public. Companies had relations with them, so I kind of have my feet on the ground, seeing what's going on in the business environment.
Yes. Very interesting. Like example, I just want to know one specific point. Like example, okay, at present conditions, what do you think in COVID-19 periods, how actually different kind of small medium enterprise or the consulting company like you, how they should behave or how they should make their business strategy in present condition next 1 and 2 years?
Well, these companies are going to be subjected to the current leases they have. It's very unfortunate if they have long-term leases. There's been a trend by technology companies over the last 5, 6, 7 years for shorter-term leases. Now, those companies that have shorter-term leases are in much better shape. Companies that have signed leases and took 5 to 10 year leases just in the last couple of years have locked into the current market. The market is definitely going to drop now. Whether it drops 15, 20, or 25% in New York City for office space rentals remains to be seen. It'll still take probably somewhere between a year and a half to 2 years to really see how much of a drop there will be, because the real estate market tends to drop a little more slowly than the stock market. As you see, what's going on in the stock market, I don't quite understand, because there's going to be fallout that I don't think we've yet seen. I don't trust the market right now. I'm being very, very cautious. I've moved a lot of money into cash carefully. The real estate market doesn't move as quickly as the stock market. It doesn't drop in a day or two. The real estate office leasing market will slowly unfold before us, where we'll see, in about a year from now, a year and a half from now, we'll see the statistics of how much the market has dropped. We're going to see it as all this new sublease space comes on the market. And there's a restriction when you market sublease space. You're not allowed to market it at a price that's less than what the landlord is marketing space. It's a standard contractual provision in your sublease clause. You cannot market the space for less than the landlord is renting space for or marketing space for in the building. So all these tenants that would be putting sublet space on the market will be marketing them without a price in front of them. So it's a matter of brokers talking with one another and saying how much, because it's not going to be showing up in any of the data that's available. But we will see this all emerge over the next year and a half, as landlords will have to adjust their prices based on the competition they're getting from the sublease space. And this has happened before. It happened after the 2008 financial crisis. It happened after the tech bust back in 2001. But it takes about a year and a half until those numbers really enter the marketplace. Just anticipate them and try and get ahead of the curve a little bit as real estate brokers to effectively rent space.
Okay, very interesting point of view that you face different kind of transformations, like traditional method to internet, now internet to again new tech challenges come. So how you think the role of technology right now, how they can play roles to developing business and other things like what you are talking about, e-commerce and different kind of websites and other marketing platform, even social media, how they can play very good roles for doing business perfectly in present situations.
Well, I'm anticipating there'll be new companies, new types of businesses emerging. I think we're going to see another industrial revolution of some sort. I don't know what it is yet. Just like I remember in 91, 92, when we were in the doldrums, I kept saying something's going to happen. We're going to see some major change. I had no idea what it was. And then the internet took off, and that totally transformed the world. And I think what's going to happen as a result of the pandemic, and I don't know what it is, there are smarter people out there that maybe can predict what it is, but there's going to be all sorts of new businesses that are going to be generated as a result of this pandemic. I mean, there's simple things we know already. These cleaning companies and cleaning supply companies that are making a lot of money. We know the companies that are in the HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning businesses are going to be required to do adjustments to all sorts of HVAC equipment around the United States for sure. I don't know what will happen in other countries, just to make people feel more comfortable in their offices. So it remains to be seen what will occur. and I can't predict it. What I can say is that, we now will have to market our space differently because people are very tentative about moving around the city.
Mhm.
So there's an immediate move to doing virtual tours. So I already started and will continue doing videos of spaces that I'll be marketing in buildings that I represent space in. And there's more and more space coming online. So I'll have to go out there and videotape it and put that online on the database that's available that I use, that everybody else is using, so that they can then, other brokers can then sift through the various offerings and then share with their customers, say 5 top spaces that they think are suitable. And people will be able to get a better view of what the space looks like with a video of it. Now, you can't really rely on that 100% because ultimately you'll still have to go out. And what they've instituted in New York now, which I'm just starting for the first time this week, is a release from liability for brokers and owners. So any tenant that goes out and looks at either an apartment or an office space has to sign a release form that states
Mhm.
they acknowledge there's a risk of COVID-19 wherever they're going, and they're
Mhm.
not going to hold the landlord or the broker liable for them getting sick. And
Mhm.
that adds another level of work for all of us. But we'll adjust and we'll have to just do that.
Mhm. Mhm. Very interesting. Like you are talking about one specific things I want to relate. You said about on the job training. Okay, let's say World Talent Economy Forum, they give you 10 10 just students, young students, those just finished their graduations. So they want to get involved with this real estate and the stock market and this kind of things. So you are their mentors, and we give you an opportunity that you have to train these 10 people based on your experience, how they become more effective for the industry. So what's the area? Even if I know it's take long time, but for our sessions, what's the area you will focus for developing this kind of youth, or give them chance to engage with the industry? They are very new. You have to understand they are very new. They have academic experience from their university, but now they are moving to the it's a bridging in between academia and industry. What's your advice, or how do you think how you will prepare your content for
Well,
learning content for your student?
it's a very interesting question
Yes.
because what I had traditionally done and what will happen going to the future is still a little bit of a mystery. When I
Hmm.
got into the business, the way you would generate business, you would physically walk into a building, you'd go to the top floor of the building, you would identify every tenant in the building, you'd then go back to your office, and at that time we used to have something called a reverse directory, which was a
Hmm.
phone book that would list each company in the building. So you'd then be able to write down the phone number on a piece of paper of every company in the building, and then you would call them and call them and call them and call them and try to get a meeting. Now, that was the early days. Now, the submarket I work in is a little bit different than major office buildings in New York, but it's there's so much now more security since 9/11. You can't easily go into a building and do that. So you have to then rely on other forms of information to identify who these tenants are and what buildings they're in. So that database that we buy provides that information. The problem is everybody has that information. So every
Hmm.
broker can look at that information and contact every tenant. So the key to my business and my training might be is we have to figure out how we can find tenants that are not in the database,
Hmm.
in addition to the ones in the database, and then talk them into meeting with us. And then it's
Hmm.
just a matter of sharing with them what our experience is, providing them with referrals, giving them some level of comfort, taking them out, introducing the marketplace, letting them know that we are not simply people that show space. We, as real estate brokers, more are consultants, advising them, educating them as to the marketplace, letting them know we know all the landlords in the city, how they operate, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, who the guys are that are going to be giving us the concessions we're looking for, what landlords are looking to do short-term leases. So the education really has to, again, it's on the job training. You have to get out there and work. So the first step is trying to find business. How do you find business? Okay. So for me, and even for young people coming into the business, it means reading a lot of different periodicals. whether it's the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Biz Now. There are various uh, uh, publications that you can get online that talk about growing companies in the United States and startup companies in the United States. And then it's a matter of tracking down these companies and finding out who the decision makers are at these companies, and either offering them a piece of space on a guessing basis as to what might work for them, or just explaining them to who you are and trying to get a meeting with them and giving them some level of comfort that they'd be in the right hands working with us.
Very interesting. On the other hand, let's say I want to make a different bridging, because you said you have some database, but everybody had database and many more things. Let's say some academic researchers, they want to involve with this stock markets, or example this real estate business. So what your advice for them if they want to do research, or they want to collaborate with you, that okay, they want to do the research, they want to getting the data, and they want to make a real case study of this project developments, or they want to build up any feasibility study. What's your advice for this academia? Like now you are handling more mature people, let's say five academic people or two academic people, they come to you, we want to do research in your industry, and what area we should focus, and how we identify problem.
Is that noise on your end? It's not on my end.
Okay. No, basically it's a, yes, yeah, basically it's the way with the vice versa, how we can learn, but problem
So,
identification.
so this data that you're alluding to is all out there already.
Mhm,
I have a small business. The
mhm,
larger companies in New York and cross country provide all this data to begin with.
mhm,
So they can certainly reach out to large companies in New York and find
mhm,
all this data online. It's already there.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
I
Yes,
mean,
no, I understand, but for from your small medium or enterprise perspective, we want to identify problem or challenges or solution. So in that situation, how we work, database is available. This is not the issue. Issue is that if we identify solutions, if we want to identify a problems, even in this pandemic situation, let's say in COVID-19 area, what area we can solve for real estate industry. Is there any challenge or everything all right? If
well,
everything all right, okay, we can move forward.
yeah, I mean, we're going through, as everybody uses the word, it's unprecedented what we're going into. So
Mhm,
there's a lot of new data that's going to come available to everybody. All you have to do is open
mhm,
up the newspaper and read any kind of real estate articles. You're going to learn from the companies that have been impacted. We have, retailers. Look, the Gap, as you may know, is a large retailer in New York. They elected to stop paying rent cross country. They
mhm,
literally stopped paying rent. They didn't go to Chapter 11. They didn't want to go to Chapter 11. It was a very arduous, expensive process. And now what they're doing, as many other tenants are, is on a one-on-one basis, they're going to the landlords and renegotiating their leases. The Gap is one of the tenants that we have in the primary building that I work with. And they
mhm,
finally come to the table, and we've worked out a deferral arrangement with them so
mhm,
that they haven't paid rent since March. They're going to start paying rent in the not too distant future. And the rent
mhm,
that they owe us in the past will be paid back to us over time. The
mhm,
landlords can't simply say, I'll let you off the hook, because the
mhm,
landlords have many expenses they must pay themselves: operating expenses in the building, real estate taxes. And on top of all that, there could be many new expenses landlords could be incurring with new cleaning protocols.
mhm, mhm. Yes,
But all this information is going to slowly come out. I'm not an expert in what we're going to
okay,
see
okay,
yet.
okay, okay.
I can only.
Understand. One is specific things. Let's say when we discussing about real estate, when we discussing about project development and this kind of things, there are many misunderstanding. Let's say one group of people, they say, okay, we cannot live on the agent or anything. But in your entire careers, you build up a very successful business relationship with your customers, with your peoples, and other things. So, question is that how you build up this trust, how we can make it more customer relationship with proper trust and transparency.
Well, it's interesting because when I represent a tenant in New York City and I take them to a building or many buildings, and we identify and negotiate the building. The landlord is who pays me my commission. The tenant doesn't pay me my commission traditionally. 99% of the time, the commission is paid by the landlord. And I'm exclusively representing the tenant. So that when I first got into the business, that was very confusing and a very hard sell to a tenant to tell them, hey, look, the landlord's going to pay me, but I'm going to represent you. So the tenants are like, well, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. How do I know you're working in my best interests if the landlord is paying you? I'm not paying you, the landlord is. So wouldn't it make more sense that you're working in the best interests of the landlord? And that's the crux of the problem of developing a business, of being able to convey to the tenants that, yes, despite the fact that big landlord is paying me, I'm representing you. And the only way that I've been able to successfully do that is through experience and by doing one deal after the next, where the tenant can then say, wow, yeah, you really negotiated this deal, one deal against another, against a third, until we decided on which deal we went into. And you gave me honest, clear advice from day one. There's nothing being hidden, nothing under, you're not hiding anything. I would tell tenants, look, this landlord's great, but the elevators in these buildings are horrible. Little things like that. And many other things that I would advise tenants, because I know the landlords. And this comes from experience. So new business comes from old business. So since I've been doing this for 35 years, most of my business now is repeat business of tenants I've represented before that either have to renew their leases or they're looking to relocate into larger space. And going forward, they'll be relocating into smaller spaces, it seems. And then referrals. And again, it goes back to the question, how can I trust this real estate broker when I'm not paying him for his services? The landlord's paying him. And that only comes with experience and proof that you've done that over and over again for other people. And other people can say, hey, yes, he was honest with me. And it's all about honesty and transparency.
Understand. Now, this is very important for the business. Every business, we need honesty and transparency. If we do not have honesty, transparency, and proper track records, so we may lose our business. I want to go to the other part of these situations. Like example, now, what's the exact situation in New York and USA? What do you think? Is everything stable or everything in a good shape? Good shapes? And what you want to share with us the beauty of USA? What type of beautiful things you have in USA that we can share with our audience?
Well, I'm a New Yorker from way back.
Mhm.
I grew up in New York, in the city. I'm a product of the New York City public school system. Grew up in a very simple middle class family. And I was fortunate enough to have someone when I was in about sixth grade from the Peace Corps in my class influence me about travel, because I'd never gone beyond 100 miles beyond my home my entire
Mhm.
life. And I said, oh, I want to start traveling. And then I was fortunate enough to study abroad. And I studied at University of Copenhagen in Denmark,
Mhm.
international business. And your question again, I'm sorry.
Yes, just I want to know the American cultures, US
Oh,
culture in present
so
situation.
my point is that, so I went to the University of Copenhagen, studied international business, traveled all the major cities in Europe. And
Mhm.
after that, I decided these are great cities, but there's still no place like New York. And I
Mhm.
decided to come back to New York. And
Mhm.
despite what's going on, I still think New York's a great city. I personally think
Mhm.
New York will come back like it has after 9/11. I
Mhm.
think we're in an unusually difficult time now. So the level of confidence in this country has been severely tarnished because of the divisiveness of our current leadership. And I don't know if you watched that rally. He just yesterday, this president of ours just continues to make statements about them and
Mhm.
us, instead of trying to bring the people together. He does not belong in office. I feel like I'm watching a very, very scary reality show,
Mhm.
but I like to remain optimistic. I like to hope that the people will somehow come around and recognize this is a great nation and come out of this. I
Mhm.
really hope he does not win again, although it
Mhm.
may have a questionable impact on the stock market. What's more important is the people in this world than the money. It's more important to know that the people can live in peace with one another in this country. And right now,
Mhm.
we feel like we're on the edge of a civil war.
Mhm.
But this is still the most beautiful country. There, I live in New York State. I've traveled all over this country. People don't know how beautiful New York State is because most people
Mhm.
just come to New York City. You go 50, 60, 80 miles north of New York City, and it's absolutely spectacular country up there.
Mhm.
And as the rest of the country, whether you're in California, whether you're in Vermont, there are many beautiful states. There's so many places to visit. And I clearly have not visited every state in the United States, but I love to
Mhm.
travel. And I think maybe some more of my travel may be here in the States again and visit places I haven't been to. It's a wonderful place to visit in terms of beauty. The question is, how are we going to get people to get on the same page with one another to live together peacefully?
Mhm.
Right now, it's very troubling times.
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Yes,
mean,
understand.
there were people
Yes, please.
leaving New York during the early parts of the pandemic and going 300 miles north just to Maine. And I was hearing stories that they were keying, meaning scratching their cars with keys because they saw New York State license plates. These are peaceful states, but people were afraid during the
Mhm.
pandemic. So the
Mhm.
pandemic will come to an end as it has in the past. Hopefully, the second wave won't be as dramatic as some may anticipate. Hopefully, we'll get a vaccine soon that will be able to be used around the world, and this will come to an end, just like the Spanish flu did, and the various other pandemics we've seen over the decades.
Mhm.
But this is a beautiful
Mhm.
country, any way you slice
Mhm.
it, and you have
Mhm.
freedoms unlike any other place in the world. And
Mhm.
I'm
Very
personally a
true.
big and I'm a big fan of the democracy. I have issues with, having lived in Denmark, I saw the issues with socialized medicine there.
Mhm.
It's great if you have no choice, but not having a choice is a problem also.
Mhm.
Because if you're in a high risk area with your
Mhm.
life, you're not going to be getting the treatment as someone with a lower risk. Whereas in America, irrespective of your risk, you should be able to get medical care if you can afford it or if you have a good health care policy.
Very interesting. Well, one specific things I just want to know from you, like you are business leaders, you are developing business, and many things you have to grow even in that particular timing. I want to give you two options. Which option you will choose? Let's say in New York, you developing your real estates and stockbrokers and this kind of business with your portfolio, and you develop your business development teams. So you have 30 years of experience, so you will get chance that from your family or from your friends you will choose 10% for your business developments. And another option, let's say you have like you get five different countries people, like one or two people from India, two people from China, two people from even Middle East, two people from New York. So what team you will choose? You will choose in between your experience and your community, or you will choose these diversified peoples. Which one would be best in terms of business opinion? You do not have to make happy to our audience. I want your honest opinion. Yes.
Well, for a New York real estate business, I would stick with people that have local knowledge.
Mhm,
You
mhm,
know, that's pretty straightforward for
mhm,
real estate
mhm,
business. As
mhm,
far as investing in companies around the world, I'd rather see have a group of people surround me that have a more international and global perspective, because we'll all
mhm.
benefit by it.
Mhm. But if you have a chance to build up like tech business and this kind of thing, then what happens? You will stick on this points, or you will go for different strategy.
For a tech business,
Yes, tech business, and you have a chance to build up business in international arena.
well, I actually have an idea for a tech business, which I'm not going to go into detail. And there's
Mhm.
certain benefits of using people around the world. Now, I love the idea of mixing with people. I mean, like I said, travel is my favorite pastime. I
Mhm.
love to go to various countries and just walk into a bar or walk into a park and talk with people and hear their perspectives on life. That's what I'd rather do that than work. I'm looking
Mhm.
forward to not working and doing more travel. And I travel as much
Mhm.
as I possibly can. So, in terms of developing a tech business of sorts, I think it makes sense to have the influences of people from around the world. So you can develop a more global type of business that will be beneficial to people all over the world. And you're
Mhm.
not going to get that in a small microcosm of New York, as
Mhm.
big a city as it may be. And although you do have many people from around the world in New York, as you know, it's a big melting pot, but they still don't
Mhm.
have the experience of someone in various other countries around the world that actually live there and talk about the uh, microeconomic matters going on in their cities that would be related to a business that would take on a global scale.
Mhm. No, very interesting. Like example, why I give you different kind of things. We have a plan that we will develop some case study based on your experience and other things. So when we develop the case study, we have to be very honest with your opinions, with your things, and definitely our research team gonna communicate with you that how we can make it more meaningful. But I have another specific understanding I want to know because when experienced people like you, business strategy is the most important things. Even in North American context, when you build up your business strategy, what's the key points you focus? Like for developing your business, you have your own strategy, but what's the key point you always focus and you always want to integrate it?
Well, in a sense, I got into this business for my own personal benefit,
Mhm.
not for others.
Mhm.
So I'm able to operate on a small level in New York. But
Mhm.
the beauty of my business is I affect many other companies and people in New York City.
Mhm.
And I love being able to help them, regardless of what their cause may be. Whether it's an AIDS related business, whether it's a tech company, whether it's a modeling agency, whether it's a yoga studio. I work with,
Mhm.
that's why I love my business.
Mhm.
In terms of growing my business, I'm not at a point where I'm really looking to grow it. I'm not like a big business person in that fashion. I'm like more of like, how can I make a decent living for myself in New York without somebody telling me what I have to do? That's how I've operated.
Okay, okay, okay. Very interesting. So, okay, like example, in present situations, what the advice you have for this industry? In COVID-19 periods, many people has to shut down their business. Now, step by step, reopening the business. What the things they can do for save their business for your industry, not for the other industry, for your project related business.
Well, our business will survive,
Okay, okay.
because it's going to reemerge. I'm on frequent Zooms with other real estate professionals, and we talk about where it's going. But we're going to survive. I think there may be many young people that are entering our business. You have to understand, our business is all about rainmaking, and it's straight commission. So unless you have a nest egg of money to support yourself, you can't get started in this business. When I got started in the business, I had already worked for about 4 or 5 years. I'd saved money. I went through a transition where I didn't like what I was doing because I didn't like sitting in an office. And I contemplated at that time either going to law school, becoming a real estate broker, um, becoming a stockbroker. Those were basically the three main things that I was looking at. And I realized being a stockbroker, I'd be sitting in as much as I'd already started trading, as much as I liked it, I thought I'd be sitting in an office too much. And everybody I knew that was a lawyer hated being a lawyer. But I didn't have the foresight to recognize at that time, which I now do, is you get a law degree, it doesn't mean you have to be a lawyer. I mean, you can pass the bar, but there are many other things you can do. And in retrospect, I'm saying, that wouldn't have been that bad a path. But I selected this business because I wanted to get out and figure out a way to make my own money without somebody telling me how to make, how much money I can make, and when I could work and when I could come. So I remember being in college thinking working 9 to 5. Oh, that was a horrible thought, working 9 to 5, because that was the common practice back then. But I can't remember ever working 9 to 5 when I got into this business. When I started in this business, I worked 6 days a week, and I get in at 8 a.m. and I'd work till 7. It wasn't 9 to 5. And the benefit of working in this business is the sky's the limit. If you're good at it, you can make a very good living or a modest living, but you can work when you want, but you just have to work very, very hard and very, very smart. And it's not something for everybody. If you don't have the ability to go out and cold call and find business on your own, it's not a place. You don't belong here, because that's the key to this business. And fortunately, I'm a very outgoing person. I like to meet new people. This is all about travel again, which is my pastime. And my business, I enjoy going to work most of the time. And the key to working, because one of the things I realized long time ago, and I mentor many young people. We are all very, very smart. We all have the capability of doing many, many things. We have the capability. The key is to find something that you're both capable of doing, but also like doing. Most importantly, like doing, so you enjoy going to work every day of the week. And the other small piece of it, which is also important, is to me, and I suggest to others, is that thing that you like. Hopefully, it's something that will earn you enough money to give you a life that satisfies your lifestyle, whether it's simple or extravagant. I don't have an extravagant lifestyle. I have a very comfortable lifestyle. I'm very happy with it, and I like what I do. And the key to the work ethic is not going to work every day because you have to go to work. It's to be fortunate enough to choose a profession that you really enjoy doing, so it doesn't feel like work.
Thank you. Already, Mr. Matthew, Mr. I think he's from USA. Mr. G. Saroj, I think he's from Sri Lanka. Everybody wishing you for your very good contributions. And World Talent Economy Forums actually want to give you thanks for your very good industrial experience. Hopefully, with this industrial experience, we can make a better plan, and we definitely in the future we will call you and how we can collaborate together and how we can make a meaningful business understanding, because experience is very important, especially when it's come to from the industry, because we have a lackings in between bridging in between industry and academia. We want to minimize the gap. The more we can minimize the gap, we can understand more from your perspective, industry perspective. We can fulfill the requirements. We do more industry driven research. We can produce more industry research, based human resources, and we can do more industry driven technology. That is the way the World Talent Economy Forum is thinking. Hopefully we will contribute more with the collaborations and with the mentorship and cooperation from your side. Thank you for your time and for your discussions. It will be really helpful for us.
Well, it was a pleasure being here. I really appreciate what you're doing, Sharif. Since I was introduced to it recently by one of your other speakers, my son, Brent
Yes,
Tellman,
yes,
I've
yes.
been skimming through many of the other interviews that you've been doing. I find it very enriching to learn about these different perspectives of different people from around the world. Um,
Mhm.
I appreciate you doing this and sharing this so that people can see perspectives of what life is in various parts of the world, whether some people are going out there like myself, just taking care of their family and going day to day and living their lives. And other people are going out there and doing absolutely wonderful things to try and save the world. I mean, I'm going to leave a couple last notes here of things that resonated with me during this pandemic and during the protests in the United States, which is there was a very famous basketball player. His original name was Lou Alcindor. He changed his name. He became a Muslim. He's known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I can't remember the exact words he put, but basically what he said, and I kind of see this in your approach, people should go out and find someone who looks totally different from them and befriend them and meet them. Meet someone that looks totally different than you and meet them. And one of the disturbing things I've found myself, and I noticed this a number of years ago when I saw Kareem Abdul-Jabbar make this statement, when we look at our Facebook friends, most of my friends are white. I have, and I grew up in a very integrated neighborhood. I was a minority myself, being white in the junior high school I went to, which was 40% Hispanic, 30% black, 30% white. And then of the whites, I was just a smattering of that ethnic background. But I now look at my Facebook profile and my friends, and at least 90% of them are white. And I'm not happy about that because my friends is in youth, because they grew up near Harlem. And all the kids from Harlem were bussed up into my middle school. And I look at my friends that are black and Asian, and all their friends, 90% of their friends are the same colors as they are. And that makes me very unhappy. And I would love to see that somehow change on a global platform where people start shifting and becoming more friendly with people that are different from them, so they can share in their lives and understand their lives better and help each other in some fashion.
Yes,
So
yes, yes. That is the fact. Like when I was in my country, then I try to integrate it with the European culture, American culture, even Asia Pacific cultures. So the more actually in my life, what I learned from my book, I learned more from human lives, more from human perspective. So that's why I always encourage my teams. You have to engage with people. People has beauty. People has beautiful heart. People has beautiful mind. Every people is very valuable. So that's why you see our name. Our name is World Talent Economy Forum. We believe that every people is talents. We are not running behind all of the big name. We have, as well as we are integrated with the industry peoples, because people has talent. So talent economy forums, we try to find out the beauty of the humans with their talents and how they can contribute for economy. The more we can integrate it with different kind of human being, we can get better solutions. And we never know what is the talent have and where they are working, how they are working, how they are living. That's why we utilizing this social media, and we love to integrate it more talented people from around the world. Even what can I tell you? From our community, you can find people from USA, from Europe, from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, even Himalaya, even Malaysia, from China, and after Australia, different countries people, even Africa, different countries peoples. We are trying to getting integrated, but hopefully we just started. When we integrated more knowledge, more relationship, then we can change the human life, then we can change human civilization. So
I
people
love
like
it.
you, yes, people like you, those who are brilliant, those who are talented, ultimately we need more of your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for
Really
your
appreciate what
time.
you're doing. Best of luck with it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time, and thank you
You're
for
welcome.
your support. And especially, you have very good family. And happy
Thank
Father's
you very
Day.
much. Thank
Unfortunately, I lose my father, but how I see you and your son has a good relationship, I want to give you salute. You are very lucky father. Thank you.
And back at you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Very nice to
Thank
see you.
you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye
Yes.
bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Yes.